Did you know, like the last time I think my stock moved like this, you took credit for it because we shared an Uber in Florida, and so anyway, the move.
There's something about the timing of some of these spaces. It's pure luck. It's not. I'm pretty sure it's not me. But it's interesting how when I think about having a conversation with a CEO, it can often be a timely moment in the market. There's something piques my interest. I was thinking about Mexico on Wednesday and reading about the transition of power and Sheinbaum and just learning more about her, how she's the protege of AMLO and some of her history, some of her thinking. I was looking at the Mexican peso chart, and then I was like, I should speak with Charles Funk and Doug Ramshaw. And so I reached out to both of you. I spoke to Charles, yesterday, and here we are today.
Well, I mean, yeah, Charles with Heliostar, Discovery Silver, Minera. I mean, certainly Minera and Discovery for a long time have been kind of bellwethers for permitting in Mexico, right? But I think with Heliostar as well, and we're seeing it across the sector. I was just looking and I disconnected, so I'll try not to do that again. There's a useful link I could include here. Where do I think you can post links, right? From
Yeah, well, what you can do is you can comment to this space basically. So the tweet that this space is on, which is pinned to my profile, you can comment under it.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I'm just there. I've done it. Now I got to figure out how I might disconnect myself again. No, okay, I'm good.
Yeah, you did it.
Yeah, it's relevant purely because of an interview I did down in Colorado at Denver. This year I did things differently because I realized last year you have these back-to-back conferences,
Uh-oh.
exact
Do we?
same presentation at both, right? So I'm like, maybe I can try something different at the Denver Gold Forum. And I did. I used the fireside chat format, which threw off the organizers because they're used to everyone standing up behind the podium giving their desk presentation. So they had to bring in the chairs and everything. And quite honestly, I hate desk presentations. And I'd love to give all presentations sitting comfortably in an armchair, having a conversation. And we did this fireside chat format where we tackled Mexico head on. And that was the link I included under your spaces because in many ways, it's exactly what we're seeing in the sector today. Of some of these Mexican companies today and the moves. There's been a lot of misinformation created by clickbaity headlines for a long time, and I think some reality dawned during Colorado conferences, and a lot more reality dawned today. But anyway, it's a good timing for a conversation on all things Mexico.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's where we'll start. We'll start with sort of the macro, the country, the backdrop there in Mexico, and then we can dig into the company a little bit later on, and we could take some questions from the astute audience. What is your take on the core mining news of acquiring SilverCrest? And I mean, this is not a total shock. Obviously, Coeur is known as a silver mining company, but it wasn't on my bingo card for 2024. And it's interesting to see how SilverCrest has traded. Like it started with a small gap higher with the market not loving this news. And now it's actually trading up pretty strongly on the day, closer to the deal price. Obviously, it has a lot to do with Core's share price because it's a stock transaction, as well. Um, but what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Silvercrest we're in a spot where the single asset producer. So you're either going to want to be multi-asset. We've seen examples recently in the gold space, that's unfortunate ones, of what can happen when things go wrong in a single asset um, producer. So they're either going to have to look to buy something or become part of something. And I'm sure that there are investors that, there's always investors that want the alternative to what's proposed. So, it was a good day. It was a good, like, that premium was going to get eaten up on a typical day without this Mexican news. The arbitrage there, was going to get played. And that the premium gets eaten up a lot in these deals. It's like I always, think that people want an exit strategy and that liquidity event, and they see their premium, and um, typically at the end of the day one settle. It's never as portrayed in the press release, and I think that. So, it was the perfect day for that news, as it turns out, because you've got this seemingly love for Mexico all of a sudden. And whilst I think that there's some overreaction in the Mexican space, it's a consequence of there being literally next to no positive news out of Mexico for 2 years. So was it deserving of a bit of if there was a day for an overreaction, it was probably today. Because it's as a Mexican space. My God, I've struggled for 2 years trying to counter a narrative, a headwind that's impossible to counter. When there's no positive news coming out, it just adds almost credibility to the negativism of these news articles, which have been fast and furious for 2 years. So yeah, I'm not a SilverCrest. Obviously, a fantastic asset. As during pre-production, it got to a point where they were going to have to, build it. It was too pricey to just acquire at that point. They built it. I haven't analyzed that deal specifically. I'm sure that there are lots of people, that would have thought, when you're a company of that size, is there some acquisition that you can tuck in to grow a new silver company as opposed to just be part of something else? But I think we've been seeing this kind of consolidation in the space, for a very long time. Like the number of gold players or silver players, these large transactions just further consolidate the playing field. And to some extent, I'm sad by that, because I think that there's opportunity for a new driven team to build a new, considerable player in the space, as opposed to being this isn't a tuck in terms of the ratios on that deal, but
No, it's not a tuck in at all. I
you
was just
know,
looking at that. Coeur is a 2.7 billion market cap in the U.S. They're making a 1.7 billion dollar acquisition. This is a big deal.
yeah, it's in MOE. When you get to that kind of 60-40 ratio split, it's closer. You're getting. I think, what was the split on this? Was like 65-35 or something like that. I don't think.
Yeah, it was.
I think you speak to different bankers, they'll have different classes of what a merger of equals is. And it doesn't mean it's 50-50, but I think that there's a range, and whether that's, I tend to have a rule of thumb that, if you're in that 60-40 range, it's an MOE. Arguably, I think, you're close to that here in terms of the impact of Las Chifas on Coeur. But it's obviously, it's a positive headline on Mexico. And we're seeing that coupled with other news coming out of Mexico today, and it's kind of just this. But the other news is not news. that's the funny thing. I don't think these companies like ours and Discovery Silver and Heliostar are moving because of the Coeur news. I think they're moving because people have woken up to the fact that, there is not an open pit mining ban in Mexico. There wasn't one that was portrayed in the electoral platform of Claudia Sheinbaum. And that's been reiterated today with people going, nothing's actually changed. I don't want to be on here and hoodwink anyone to say, the sky was falling and it's now not. I think there were people that didn't understand the nuance of election year in Mexico. Um, and I realize now there's a little bit more clarity. I said after the election result, it was a bad election result because investors want clarity, and we were going to have a few more months of murkiness, and that's kind of played out. And hopefully, as I was saying down at the Colorado conferences, bluer skies ahead, and not because I've got some rose-colored glasses look on it that things have to get better, and because my company needs them to get better. I mean, we were hearing, one of the best parts of that conference to me was what we were hearing on the ground, and what we were seeing on the ground was reflected in conversations I was having with much larger peers down there, and what they were seeing as well. And it had no alignment with some of these headlines like we saw. It's funny, Fridays, normally are kind of quiet days. What was it, about a month ago, where Reuters put out the headline, open pit mine ban advances in Congress. And Discovery Silver and Minera had big falls that day. But it literally was a bill coming out of committee stages that then never got even talked through at the lower house level, to get pushed up to the Senate, and yet it made for another round of these headlines. And it's unfortunate that, because I'm sure a lot of people got spooked out reading headlines that didn't have the full story. And it's why on a podcast I did the other day, I said, investors who take the trouble to quiz companies and take the trouble to call companies can have an edge over people that read Bloomberg headlines. And that's what you're trying to do is, in this investing world, is kind of like the professional card counter at Vegas. Maybe you've got 50-50 odds against that, or slightly over that, but you're better than that guy that just comes off the street, maybe after having a few too many beers on the strip, sits down at a blackjack table because it's the best odds in the house, but doesn't have the edge.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, so yeah, a lot to unpack there. In August, there was definitely a big pickup in fear and uncertainty and doubt around Mexico. And what you said is, I think some people got shaken out. Well, I can tell you for sure some people got shaken out in August. You can see the share price action and trading volume on a number of these stocks, including yours. There was that day in mid-August where it was absolutely just pure red bloody action across all the Mexican open pit players. I want to ask you about this in the mining sector, because I think this is an important topic for some investors to understand. The mining sector globally has a challenge on the PR front. They're playing at a disadvantage always, because a politician like AMLO can give a speech and he can throw out a one-liner or a two-liner that has no actual rooting in what's actually going to play out in Parliament or Congress, what's actually going to be passed into law. But it will get him headlines and it will make him more popular with some of his base, right? Trump does the same thing. Biden does the same thing. I'm not necessarily talking about mining. I'm just talking in general. Politicians say stuff a lot. And it
Robert,
doesn't actually, yeah.
Robert, I hate to do this. I joked earlier. I'm going to get a call from market surveillance today. I actually just need to. I will be back in a matter of minutes, but I actually need to call market surveillance. So I will leave this and rejoin in hopefully just a matter of minutes. My apologies.
Okay.
You're about to hit a really key point here.
Okay. Does anybody else want to step up and speak with me? I mean, I'm good at talking to myself. I'm very good at that, but I'm not sure this is the setting for that. So, if somebody would like to jump up, go ahead, and I'll activate your speaker link. Maybe high grade, maybe Eric Coffin, maybe Alan Berry. He's good at speaking. Oh, boom! There's Alan. Oh, there's high grade. Sorry, Allan, I'm going to put you behind high grade because this is in his wheelhouse. Hey, hey, Luis, go ahead and unmute yourself.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Just another day at the office.
You've been following this very closely, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what's happening in Mexico the last few days.
Yeah, it's well, I'll take it back a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago, when I put out a tweet that was really talking about asking the questions that really should be asked when it comes to this open pit mining situation that was being discussed ad nauseum, and a lot of folks were pretty much just regurgitating the headlines, but not really looking underneath the hood. And so I put a tweet out back in August asking, the right questions. And then, as time went on and, we went into September with AMLO's positioning with 18 constitutional amendments, he really got tied up into the key factors that he was running on, which he wanted to cement his legacy on, which was judicial reform and a few others. And so that took up all the time. There was 30 days for him to pass or try to pass 18 constitutional reforms, and he only did about 3 or 4. And so what happened after that process played out is that now Claudia Sheinbaum is now the president of Mexico, and her vision on mining was slightly different than AMLO's. And so it's not a surprise.
Hey, Luis, I think I just lost you. Um, are you moving around? You might have hit a dead spot.
Operating under. And the September 30-day period was the period of that we needed to get by, and we got by it. And now all of a sudden, the tone has changed. Um, and so this morning, there was an update on her 100-point plan. And interestingly enough, there was no mention of the open pit situation. So that's why the market is moving today. The developers in Mexico are moving today. And it just so happened to be on a day where a deal was announced for an obviously
Hmm.
unrelated company, but it's Mexican based and it's underground mining. So it's completely unrelated. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. I think the market right now, there was a lot of fear, with the judicial reform. There was a lot of fear in Mexico about the political situation. I think it's clear that Claudia has a different sort of mindset. She's more pro business. She has to be. They're running deficits. AMLO really ran the deficit in Mexico. They need investment. The last thing they want to do is scare off the nearshoring potentials that they have and everything else that's going on there. So, nothing's set in stone, but that subtle change to the 100-point plan is quite subtle, and I don't know what it really means, but I don't see it in there anymore, and I think the market's now discounting the possibility of the worst case scenario not happening.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think obviously the previous president was not a friend of the mining industry, and so when he started saber rattling to pass all these bills in his final month, it created a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And the mining industry is always always an object of attack, especially for left wing politicians. So it created a lot of fear, and now that fear has subsided with the transition of power, Scheinbaum taking office, and as you said, this comes out today, this 100-point plan, and clearly the banning of open pit mining is not one of her priorities. There's bigger fish to fry. And as you said, just look at the peso chart since May or June, and you can see the hit the country has taken. with these deficits that they've been. I mean, the deficits have been soaring since 2016. Not too much different from the United States, but obviously it's a much smaller country, and they don't have the reserve currency and the full weight and force of all the power of the U.S. So it's a little harder for a country like Mexico to run massive deficits year after year. And so I guess he's not going to attack the mining sector, at least for a little bit here. Doug is back, so thank you for speaking up. And let me activate. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Hey, sorry about that. That's a first for me.
It's a first for me too. I haven't had market surveillance call a CEO during one of my spaces. I hope it didn't have anything to do with me.
No. It's obviously, I'm sure I'm not the only one with a Mexican stock today that's getting calls, but I think you were talking about election year stuff, and again, I kind of tackled that head on in that link at the Denver Gold presentation. This is the kind of nuance that people don't understand with the political structure down there. And so, in Canada, for example, with the Green Party, there's a lot of Green support in Canada. They get one seat in Parliament. In Mexico, with the proportional representation, there's a very big Green component in Mexico that then gets reflected in Congress. I think they're about 12 or 13% of the Morena coalition. So whilst AMLO's political party, or now Sheinbaum's political party, is Morena, it rules via a coalition that includes this 12 to 13% Green Party component. So I think there was some real 3D chess played this year, where if you think back to, again, talking all these negative headlines, in February, March of 2023, there were mining reforms that were pushed forward by AMLO. Ideologically, I had no issue with those. Water management, environmental sensitivities, all this other, use it or lose it on mineral claims and concessions, reducing the time that a company can sit on land, because that has happened with some of the big players down there for a long time. I thought those reforms last year were more impactful on the exploration side than the developers and the production side. But ideologically, I didn't really have an issue with them. At no point, despite years of headlines about open pit mining bans, at no point in those reforms of last year was there even a simple bullet. Oh, and by the way, no more open pits. Now you fast forward to election year, where the biggest thing that AMLO wanted to change was his judicial reform. But to do that, your coalition had to be fully on side. And I say what you like. I don't like the changes they've made at the judiciary. I think it concentrates power. It's not about removing. If anything, it's going to lead to more corruption in Mexico But it was a power grab, and courts had not always been friendly to AMLO. So if you really want to push the judicial reform, what do you do in an election year? You suddenly throw out a lot of red meat to your coalition bloc and to the Greens, including fracking, genetically modified corn, open pit mining bans suddenly reared their head, except they didn't. In Ms. Sheinbaum's electoral platform, 0.87 out of a 100-point plan was, the rough translation was no granting of new mineral concessions for open pits. The two key parts there was she was talking about mineral concessions. If she wanted to say permits, she could have said permits. It was new mineral concessions, and new, not retroactive. And this actually goes back to something AMLO had said at the beginning of his term. When people forget about this, when you've lived Mexico like I have for the last 5 years, and you remember all this stuff, he had said very early on that under the previous administration, way too much of Mexico had been offered up for mineral concessions and stuff. So he was always specifically talking about mineral concessions. And whilst he said things like his government had not granted new permits, that wasn't the case. all of SilverCrest, Minera all received permits from the AMLO government, and 2 out of the 3 of those were open pits. So her platform was never about banning open pits. In fact, she was on the campaign trail, and she had spoken to so long as projects pass a strict environmental review, which should be no different in any country, no issue with that, and have strong local support, then those projects should be advanced. But for whatever reason, and a lot of it is a lot of clickbaity headlines, it got conflated to being much more than it actually was. So is today's news? I don't know if it's anything new, to be honest, but I do think it's the clarity that investors were seeking and that they hadn't really got from the election result, which allowed more fear mongering about the sky is falling type scenarios in Mexico. So it's election year stuff. We're going to see the same in Canada next year. You're seeing it in the US right now. A lot of stuff that gets said on the campaign trail that gets reported and makes headlines, and it's much more nuanced than that.
It's crazy how some of these stories. I mean, this one was rooted in some shreds of truth. He's obviously the previous president was very far left, and the mining his ally, and he was not an ally of the mining industry. So it was very easy for people to take a shred of truth and run with it. But my point is the mining industry more globally. Like there's a big hurricane that hit Tennessee and North Carolina in the last week, and it created a lot of damage and death. It's a tragedy. It's absolutely horrible, and it's not being covered very well by the media. Well, a friend of mine last night sends me some Instagram post that went viral. Some lady posted, and people come up with the craziest theories that this was orchestrated by the government to get the lithium in North Carolina. So the mining industry is behind the hurricane and the natural disaster. And this is like, my friend probably has like a 140 IQ. She's not dumb. She sends me this, and I just read it, and I'm just like, what? This got 2 million views? And I had to respond to her. I said, okay, this is fake news. Okay, this is clearly fake news. First of all, you can't create a hurricane like this, and the mining industry is nowhere near powerful enough to do something like this, right? And it's the situation this industry faces globally, where a story gets taken out of context, people don't really understand what's happening, and they run with it. And the mining industry kind of is fighting with a disadvantage constantly, because there's only certain things that they can say for fear of a million other things. What's your take on how the mining industry can deal with some of this FUD that gets propagated?
Well, I mean, I think we need to do a better job. I've always said I think the industry does a very poor job of education. We spend all the time talking about it's me rather than the industry in general, and the NGOs. I mean, I remember when someone sent a link, and it was again the Mexican mining ban type things, and it came from some Mungo Bay website or something like that. Then I looked at the website menu options at the top, and it was oceans, rainforests, this, that, and you could see it was, again, like we should be very sensitive to the environment we operate in, and mining should, use best practices to ensure that mining can be a positive impact on the very communities and the very location it's in, rather than a negative one. But I don't think we do a great job as an industry in kind of pushing back against a lot of this stuff. And it is very hard to push back against it. Like I found it near on impossible over the last couple of years to have um, because it would be very easy for me to just have a counterpoint to all these headlines, and people look at it and go, "Well, of course you'd have to say that, Doug," and to a certain extent they'd be right, but it's you. That's the significance of kind of today, and maybe why there's been an overreaction, because there's been no pushback against any of this, and instead, and it's hard for an industry to, especially a political narrative. But you saw the same in Chile a few years back. It was, there was one after another project that wasn't getting its permits, and you could see there was a political drive there. It wasn't anything to do with those specific companies, and we've seen, Rio 2 was a great example of something hammered from a pure political point of view, and good for Alex and the team there that they've recovered. They dug in, and the results are there and speak for themselves in terms of Rio 2's progress in coming out of. But it was a brutal time for those shareholders and that company at the time.
Yeah, that was another great shakeout in the junior mining sector. That stock fell to what, like 15 cents, 13 cents. Now it's 70 cents. So, very good for them to persevere and make it through it and get the permit finally. Fantastic story. We need more stories like that in the junior mining sector. But in the meantime, a lot of people who bought earlier, maybe 2020, 2021, got shaken out there when the bad news hit.
No, for sure, and it was kind of a nothing burger, but it took almost 18 months for that nothing burger to prove itself to be exactly that, and it did damage people in the interim, and it's unfortunate, and I think it hit 10.5. I know I got some at 12, but I like Mexico still has a way to go, right? There are still going to be people that are going to look for actual real news, not just these headlines that are now kind of countering the negative headlines, but you need to see actual progress made on the permitting front. And I like that, because in many ways, again, against this backdrop of negativity, there's probably 4 or 5 companies that could put out something. I don't know where Minera may be in the line, but it doesn't have to be first. The progress or the lack of progress on permitting in Mexico has been so bad that if anyone starts actually coming out with permit related news, that's going to be the next step up for people regaining full confidence in Mexico as a jurisdiction. And I think at Denver Gold Forum, Discovery Silver, Tony McCooch indicated they're hopeful of permits for their large new greenfields open pit in Chihuahua in early 2025. Now I don't know if that's first half of 2025 or first quarter of 2025, but that kind of news, or Cerro de Oro permitting news, is I think what some people are going to be waiting on. But we'll also see movement on simple things that got kind of held up in the last couple of years of AMLO, like basic permit amendments. Alamos Gold, albeit an underground deposit, their PDA deposit, which is part of the Mulatos complex in Sonora, I think a few weeks back when they put out news, indicated they expected to see that permit amendment by year end. Yes, it's just a permit amendment at an existing mine, and it happens to be an underground deposit. But we haven't had that kind of news for a long time. We saw it with Torex last October, and there were sympathy moves in companies that were in the queue even back then. So I think the next shoe to drop that will be the real encouraging one, as opposed to just kind of almost this first bit of news today that counters 2 years of negativism, we'll be starting to see some flow on permit amendments and permits at new mines. And we haven't seen that yet, but I believe it's coming, and certain other companies believe it's coming. And certainly, us and our bigger peers are hearing from the permitting authorities down there that there just almost needed to be a bit of a clearing of the deck. You don't have to walk back some previous comments if the person who made them is no longer in power. It's almost kind of like, today's newspapers are tomorrow's, garbage. I think I just quoted a line from Hugh Grant in Notting Hill, but anyway.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really good what you just said. It's true. And I think that it helps investors who will hear this conversation to understand how sometimes how politics plays out, especially in Latin American countries. You have to wait for the change of power to clear the deck and have a new moment and a clean slate. And that's really good what you added there about Tony and what he said at the Denver Gold Forum. I mean, if they get their permit, then that's good for Cerro de Oro, in my opinion. That's great news. That would be a huge catalyst for a lot of the miners in Mexico. And I think this is an example again of how context is everything, especially in the junior mining sector. When we read blog posts or news articles put out there, they often don't get the story exactly right, and that's just the way it is. And so, as an investor, you really have to use your brain. You have to think about things. You have to do your own research, and you should speak to CEOs. You should speak to people in the industry, and add important context to what the wisdom is out there, whether it's on mining.com or X or like an analyst report. You have to add your own context to sort of dig in and really get it right. And I think those like high grade who did their own DD, spent the time, they got it right here, and hopefully they'll continue to get it right. So let's talk about the company in Cerro de Oro, Doug. So what do you think the status is of this elusive permit for your key asset?
Well, I think again, going back, these headlines are unhelpful because I think they make people think that all these permits sit in an inbox and have been gathering dust. That's not the case. They've been working themselves across the desk towards that outbox. Are there some companies in the outbox right now, or close to it? Probably yes. Where is Minera on that desk? It's working its way across it. We in our quarterly update, we actually added a little bit of color because I thought it was important. We got a new information request from SEMARNAT, the environmental permitting body down there, and it was requesting that our 2022 flora and fauna data, that kind of environmental baseline data, just be updated with some fresh sampling for 2024. No issue with that. You wouldn't be able to permit anything anywhere with, what could be considered stale dated environmental baseline data. And as I joked in Denver, it's not like over the last couple of years, herds of wildebeest are now grazing on Cerro de Oro. Nothing's really changed in that regard. So it was good to put an example of the back and forth that goes on routinely as these permits move themselves across desks. So where we are in the pecking order, I'm not sure. I know that the progress is being made and everything is seemingly positive. We also know that we have incredibly strong local support for this project. So again, to Ms. Sheinbaum's comments about it's something that, a project can't just pass environmental review. They want it to have strong local support too. We have that there in northern Zacatecas. And it's such a storied mining state. And that's why it's important to remember. And when you do the diligence, and Economic Alpha did some fantastic diligence looking at which senators represented which party in which of those big northern mining states, because whilst mining as a share of Mexican GDP has been dropping in states like Sonora and Zacatecas, it's plus 20% of their GDP. And these states have multiple Morena party senators in. So even if something had come through at the lower house level to go up to the Senate, I don't think you were going to see voting along party lines at the Senate level to allow that change as proposed out of committee to happen. In the end, it didn't even get talked about on the lower house floor. So yeah, we're making progress alongside a lot of other companies. Whoever gets it first, fantastic. I think all are waiting on to resubmit to the new administration I think they said at Denver as well, they were resubmitting this month for their layback. I think they've got two big layback amendments at their giant Camino Rojo deposit. I think they've guided, first half of next year for receiving those. So, I wish everything had moved quicker. Mexico tends to be a very quick permitting environment relative to Canada or the US. And the last couple of years, it's been anything but. But I think for anyone who's been kind of long suffering in a Mexican development play for the last couple of years, 2024 was a tough year because we saw a genuine opportunity cost to staying patient, having that resolve, and realizing that maybe, the sky isn't falling. There was a genuine opportunity cost this year that didn't exist in 22 or 2023. But with gold price moving, you're seeing stuff move, and there was this seemingly continuation of permit purgatory in Mexico. And I think those dark clouds are starting to pass. But if I can stress one thing today with all these headlines, with these moves and everything else, nothing's actually changed. There was never an open pit mining ban. There was nothing enshrined in law. There was the perception, probably quite rightly in the last couple of years of AMLO, of almost a de facto ban, but nothing enshrined in law there. And there is nothing enshrined in or being legislated to that effect. And so is this news today, or is this just an awakening to the fact that it wasn't really the news story that it's been made out to be over the last little while? Probably the biggest takeaway on all these moves in stocks, including Minera today, is maybe it's just the market waking up to the reality that those headlines were not entirely or even close to accurate of the real situation on the ground in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. If anybody has a question for Doug Ramshaw, we're probably going to do this for another 10 or 15 minutes or so. So go ahead and ask to speak, and I'll call on you. I'm just looking at your deck. How is it being a gold producer at 2660 gold, Doug?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I view us as a quasi gold producer. Really, we're still more of a development play than a production play.
Mm-hmm.
And Cerro de Oro completely shifts that dynamic. It's such a step change in terms of our production profile that I think I would be more comfortable than referring to ourselves as a gold producer and dropping the quasi. The thing we did this year, because like so many other companies, our permit amendment clearly got caught up at Santana, our first mine, absolutely got caught up in the political backdrop in the back half of 2023 and into 2024. And good on our team to kind of look and go, we can't sit on our hands, and we shouldn't expect our shareholders to sit on our hands. So we did resequence how we were going to use existing pad space there to get some production going and some advancement of mining operations going there. And you're almost ramping up as if you're starting a new mine, because it was a brand new pit. So it takes a while to open up a pit, get appropriate development access, equipment access to really start moving the mining rate. So I said earlier in the year that the benefits of this new plan would be felt in Q3 and Q4, and then thereafter. Q3 was really about mining more again and stacking more on the pad. And I think in Q3 we mined and stacked more gold than the entire of 2023. That's how low the bar was set in 2023 as we waited on the permit amendment. 2024 we'll see, Q4 will start seeing more of that production coming as the leach cycle takes hold. And then into 2025. And it will be good to get back to kind of a cash generative business, which is what Santana is meant to be. But Santana is a small mine relative to Cerro de Oro that we're permitting right now, which, Santana is only ever a 20,000 ounce a year mine. It's a great little cash cow for us. But Cerro de Oro is a 60,000 ounce a year mine, and we're actually permitting an upside case, which is more like 80,000 ounces a year. That is more than just a step change in our production, and I think will allow me to feel more comfortable saying, look, we're a gold producer rather than a quasi gold producer. But yeah, certainly the gold price helps. But, I've always said, and this is the problem with generalists investing in the sector, it's like they see gold, the sector is so cyclical. We've always been about trying to build and develop mines that work in whatever gold price environment. And sure, you want to take advantage of higher gold prices when they come, but you should also be building mines which stress test in a $1,600-$1,800 gold price environment as well. And ours stress test exceptionally well in a poorer gold price environment as well as take advantage of a good one.
Yeah, just looking at your PEA for Cerro de Oro, and it's an NPV of 150 million, US, with an 11-month payback period and a 111%. Oh, there's a lot of ones there. A 111% IRR at $1,600 gold. So let me ask you: are those real numbers? And if gold is 2,600 instead of 1,600, what do those numbers look like?
Like, PEAs vary in quality, right? Like, I think they are a snapshot. There is a plus or minus on those numbers, which, I think I would try to take a more conservative approach, but I'll be conservative on both our cost inputs and our and gold price here. And I'd say the life of mine AISC in that PEA is 873. Let's just say it's 1,000. And let's not look at $2,600 spot and think of it as 2,000. That's $1,000 an ounce margin on a project that has a capital intensity of $500 an ounce in terms of the capital to build it, which is industry leading. On a deposit that only cost us $6, less than $6 an ounce to buy in the ground. These numbers are spectacular. Even if you want to stress test it still further, so it's the biggest. Like, I wish our shareholders were all already benefiting from it, and I can almost. It's hard not to look and just imagine where we're going to be and almost the fun we can have in further growing this company with the cash generative capabilities of that project. It seems like a small project, but the cash that it would spit off has incredible torque in a company of our size. One of the things with open pit heap leach is they have very little sustaining capital. So the bulk of that operating cash flow is free cash generation. And I find that's very, very exciting for the future of Minera. We still got to get to that point. But open pit heap leach builds like that can be really, really impactful. And they also can work in lower gold price environments. I think that I ran it at $1,250 gold. It still had a 40% IRR. So what that shows is you can stress test those costs considerably. And the nice thing is it's also it's a $23 million capex build. With 30% contingency, it was 28.8, something like that. But if, as a banker said to me a few years back, when there was major cost inflation and in the sector, it was like, if you had a 20% cost overrun, it's $6 million. It's not it's annoying, but it doesn't suddenly create some huge funding shortfall, as we saw with a lot of big single asset development projects that ran into hundreds of millions of capex spent. So I think that's one of the attractions of this model is, yes, it's low cost. You're in Mexico, which has an abundance of skilled labor. Something which we're seeing real cost squeezes on skilled labor in some of these tier one jurisdictions like Canada, the US, Australia. There's real sticky employment costs there. You have an incredible history of mining in Mexico. It's why we use mining contractors there. There's an incredible skilled labor force. And I think that's the nice thing about these assets, and what NGOs forget about when they rail on the mining industry. They don't think about the local communities that want these mines. Sure, there are projects in areas where the locals are up in arms and don't want them, but you have this opportunity to benefit your local stakeholders. It's not all, and should never always be thinking about your shareholders. Absolutely, they are important to you, but all levels of stakeholders are important to you. And I think the economic benefits of our investment in Mexico will be seen throughout those communities and throughout the state levels. And that's a really great benefit of what we do for a living.
All right, Allan, you get to ask the last question.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for letting me on. And I think I have a bit of a unique perspective because I'm a Canadian mining guy who actually lives in Mexico for the last 7 years. And I live in the state of Zacatecas, where Cerro de Oro is. And getting back to some of your earlier comments, Doug, I completely agree with you that sometimes investors outside of Mexico get really wrapped up in the headlines that come out from political rhetoric during an election period. Being on the ground here in Mexico, I do believe that Claudia Sheinbaum is going to be much more practical. The fact of the matter is that if you ban open pit mining, it doesn't just affect gold. It affects other things that are crucial for the economy of Mexico. Another thing that getting back to the GDP, although mining is not as big as it used to be, it still is an important part of the economy when it comes to high-paying jobs. I live in a gated community here in Zacatecas, and I see a lot of mining people live here, own houses here, own nice cars, and so it is a crucially important part for high-paying jobs in Mexico. So I believe ultimately that Claudia is going to be much more practical than AMLO. And I also think that on the environmental side, like solar energy is really important here. And if you're going to have green energy, solar is a really important part of that mix in Mexico. And if you start to affect the mining in Mexico, silver is important for solar panels. So yeah, I think that a lot of this is overblown, and I think that better times are ahead. I also believe that when people pay attention to headlines, they often miss opportunities. And right now I'm looking at a lot of projects here in Mexico that I'd love to get my hands on, and I just think that opportunity is here. And another thing that I don't think anyone's looking at, Doug and Robert, is that when you get a person like Javier Milei in Argentina doing the things that he's doing, oftentimes these Latin American or Latin politicians tend to follow each other when they're doing good things. And I don't think anybody's really giving Claudia Sheinbaum the view that maybe she will look at what is happening in Argentina and saying, hey, we'd like to have that happening here in Mexico. So I don't know if I really had a question other than to make some comments. And Doug, next time you're in Zacatecas, we should have a coffee.
Okay, sounds good. The Argentina thing is actually kind of interesting because Morena, like going into the elections, I mean, our stock rallied. I'm not sure about our peers, but I think people thought Morena Party was going to have a softer election result, almost in keeping with how some things had been shifting in Latin America. The Morena Party is a very popular party. AMLO was a populist. Doesn't always equate to truth, but it's certainly what he says is very popular, and it gets out the vote. So I think that's why we saw this initial overreaction in post the election results, where all the good of the rallying leading into it was seemingly, again, we get to the sky is falling kind of analog. But yeah, she is coming across. She's been saying all the right things. She's been making all the right cabinet appointments. I thought it was a good thing. I said at the time, the morning of the election, after the election, when the peso got slammed, it was good. It was a good warning shot that with this increased concentration of power comes this responsibility to wield it carefully. The international market's reaction was a good shot across the bow. I think she has subsequently followed up with market-friendly appointments, a clear and much more pragmatic approach to handling things than perhaps more of a bombastic approach we saw from her predecessor. And I think people are waking up to that. And but you'll still have people that are, portray her as some World Economic Forum environmental communist. And the reality is, I don't believe she is, but if she was all those things, it's an improvement. The bar had been so poorly lowered in recent years. And, she was the heir apparent of AMLO. She had to some extent, echo on the campaign trail a lot of the AMLO and Morena Party positions. But she was also going to have to protect aspects of his legacy whilst clearly walking her own path. And I think people have been watching to see which path she is choosing to take. And it seems like a very good balance with protecting aspects of AMLO's legacy, whilst obviously defining her own. And so far, so good. But we are also literally day 4 of her taking office. So again, let's, we'll take a big breath and perhaps realize that, things weren't as bad as they were portrayed as, but we also want to see some positive direction to kind of, affirm this kind of more recent reaction in mining specific stocks in Mexico.
I think, am I still a speaker here? I think I am.
You are.
I've also noticed, Doug, some trends in politics that are quite interesting. AMLO was a very bombastic guy, and he was able to capture a lot of populace. I think I lost you guys. Did I lose you?
No, you're still speaking, Allan.
Sorry. He was very bombastic and able to capture a lot of votes, but it's not nearly as popular when it comes to the business people in the country, especially in mining. And he ran the risk of affecting nearshoring efforts, which are a economic boon to the country. But the trend that I'm seeing is that he really was on the world stage in the Spanish-speaking countries as somebody that was being followed. And I think that Javier Milei is displacing him. And I don't think a lot of people are really considering that Milei magic could start to take effect. It already is in places like Peru and Chile. And I think it's also going to take effect in Mexico. And the bottom line is the bottom line. We need in Mexico, we need nearshoring, we need mining. And if you start doing things that affect one industry, it can have a spillover onto others. So, yeah, I think that people are missing the boat down here in Mexico.
Very good, Allan. Thank you for joining the conversation. Thank you very much, Doug, for doing this. High Grade for joining in, and all your good DD on Mexico helped. I think people who pay attention to the smart folks in this industry who do their research and actually know what they're talking about can have an edge. And I think that's been proven here. But Doug's point is well taken. It's 4 days. It's not a panacea. Let's see what the future holds. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Robert.
Cheers.